Okay, excellent. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Alejandro Gutierrez, and I'm a faculty lecturer and academic program coordinator for the data analysis for complex systems and data-driven decision-making at McGill School of Continuing Studies. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about a very interesting topic. Today, we're going to be talking about navigating complex systems, augmenting technology with human insights, with Marc Delesclefs, an expert in the topic. So it's a pleasure to be here. And before we get started, we would like to play a little video with the McGill's land acknowledgement. Excellent. For you to enjoy this presentation better, we have a couple of recommendations. If you are connected to using a VPN, it's highly recommended that you close it and rejoin the session, because that will improve the internet connection in case that you have some difficulties. Your microphone, it's automatically turned off. If you want to interact with the presenter, you can use the chat function. I will be monitoring all the questions and comments that appear there, and I will try to insert them as part of the conversation with Marc. You also might have an option to submit Q&A or questions using a Q&A function. I will also be monitoring that. This session will be recorded, and it will be published as part of the McGill School of Continuing Studies YouTube channel. So you will be able to review the material after. With that, I would just like to mention that the presentation this session is structured into two parts. First, the expert will present, or he will guide us through the content, and then we will leave, and that will take us around 40 minutes, and then close to the end, around 10 to 15 minutes before, we will have a Q&A portion with the speaker. With that, I would like to introduce Marc. Marc is an expert in complex adaptive systems with extensive experience in strategic planning. He combines hands-on experience with deep knowledge in complexity science, enabling guiding teams through challenging and dynamic environments. He has an empathetic and open leadership style. He fosters collaboration and empowers teams to implement effective strategies. So it's going to be very interesting to hear him talk about this interesting topic, navigating complex systems, augmenting technology with human insight. Marc, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you, Alejandro. So yes, before I share my presentation, I'll just quickly introduce myself. As Alejandro mentioned, my name is Marc Delesclefs. My background, I sort of came up through a project management environment. Early on, I worked for Toyota, got very much trained in quality management, in Six Sigma methodologies. Later on in my career, I ended up working in London, UK for Transport for London, initially on infrastructure projects that were, again, very linear, controlled environments. You have a plan, you get permits in place, you build things. And as I started, moving through different types of projects at Transport for London, working more and more on human systems, like how do we change the behavior of people? I worked on the bike share systems. We'd bought the Bixi system from Montreal in London, and I ended up later on working in strategy and planning at Transport for London, where the tools and techniques I'd learned early on in project management weren't working to work in human systems to make the changes that we were wanting to do. And when I was in strategy and planning, responsible for trying to change the behavior of a city to increase active travel, we found that we had to totally change the approach that we wanted to do, and created a brand new business case that TfL hadn't seen, Transport for London hadn't seen before, applied different approaches to managing it, and it was incredibly well received. Uh, but when I was trying to explain to people what we had done, I found that it wasn't being taken on. People weren't copying it. There was lots of nodding heads. People were very interested, but they went away and they didn't know what to do with it. And it wasn't until years later when I was working at School of Engineering Studies and met Alejandro, and he started sharing with me these ideas, and he said, "Oh, you should go and read, Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows or The Fifth Discipline and these other books," that I started getting an insight as to maybe why the things that we had done in Transport for London worked. Uh, and a lot of the things I want to present to you today is actually based on the work of a Welsh uh, knowledge management, project management, complexity management expert called Dave Snowden, who developed the Kinevin model. And the reason I want to present his work is that it really resonated with what I had done and reflected my real world experiences, but in a way that is very lucid and clear and scalable. And that is very important, that it gives guidelines that were repeatable and that people could take on so that I wasn't left with that frustration of like, why aren't people following our example? And part of the reason why it's difficult to follow the examples in these complex environments is because we move out of the world of best practice, something that we'll cover when we go into the presentation. So I will now actually get started on the presentation. If we share this, get to the start. So here we are, navigating complex systems, augmenting technology with human insight. And I had a bit of a play with that because often we talk about technology being there to augment humans, but I get the feeling that we still have this idea of a Renaissance view of science and technology where the universe is seen as mechanistic, it's a machine. And we've, in many ways, on our structured approaches, reduced humans to part of a machine. And this is a way to suggest that we actually need to lean into our humanity, that humans evolved to have things that make them particularly good and essential in managing our systems, our human systems. So when we're talking about systems, there are different types of systems. There are three types of systems that emerge anywhere in nature. They're ordered systems. Now, this is very constrained systems. This is, the world of manufacturing. This is, the Toyota line management sort of environment. This is the world of scientific management, the Taylorism, Fordist approaches, where we set goals. Causes and effects are known or knowable. The metaphor is a machine. We're sort of augmenting physical augmentation of the human being to be able to perform better, faster, quicker. And the great majority of the tools and techniques that we have in organizational theory or in project management are born out of this manufacturing environment. And they are then taken on by well-meaning people often, and try to be applied everywhere as methods that are best practices that can be worked anywhere. And unfortunately, this doesn't work well because not all systems function the same way. There are some that are totally chaotic, where there's no real constraints. There's no linear cause and effects. Things are unpredictable. There aren't really any patterns. It's just statistical events that happen. Now, humans don't seem to like chaos. We seem to very quickly shift out of it. It's actually very difficult to maintain chaos in human environment and human systems. What we do see is complex systems. Now, there is a sort of entanglement here where there are patterns that emerges and they shift, but everything is entangled, everything is interacting. It's like uh, interlaced in ways that are utterly non-predictable. Uh, we we do not have any mechanisms of predicting what will occur in the future. And this is very important to note because if we take approaches from the ordered environment where we're told to set clear goals of the future, define an ideal future state, and then you do a gap analysis and you try to work out a plan to get from current state to ideal state, this only works if there's an ordered, structured system. In a complex environment, uh, we cannot predict what happens. It's your basic three-body problem from physics. There's no way to predict it. There are too many possible patterns that are emergent that you need to be able to manage them as they emerge with a sense of direction. Uh, so what we really need to do is have like a flexible, adaptive approach for these human-centered environments. I think there's a quote I like from Henry Mintzberg that he says, there are species of organizations, just as there are species of animals. Don't mix them up. A bear is not a beaver. Hospitals are not factories. Advertising agencies are not fast food companies. And I think that's very important to bear in mind that we need to always adapt to the context. Context is everything, everything. And I want to show why humans are vital in managing this sort of complex environments. It's very important that we pay attention to what model we have as to how the universe functions. If we assume the universe is ordered, we will miss things. And inattention blindness is something that you've probably all seen in different experiments and tests. I've seen on television when somebody goes into a hotel and at reception, somebody greets them and then ducks down to pick something up and a different person stands up. And 83% of people don't notice it because we don't live in a world where people shift like that. We don't look for it. And the picture I have up here is a lung scan that was given to radiologists who were told to look for cancer nodules. And in the top right of the scan, you can see a gorilla multiple times the size of a cancer nodule. Yet 83% of the radiologists who looked at this scan failed to notice the gorilla, although eye tracking software demonstrated they looked directly at it. Uh, this implication is important because we must recognize that what we perceive is limited by what we expect to perceive. And you cannot teach people to notice something that is unpredictable. So we can teach radiologists to maybe look out for gorilla, but then if it was something other than a gorilla, we would miss it. So how do we pay attention to anomalies and things that happen in the system? The way that we create our experience of reality is that we create lots of little micro hallucinations of what we expect to see and then test for errors. But we need to be alert and pay attention to these anomalies to be able to even notice them and respond to them. So the Cynefin framework, which was developed by Dave Snowden 25 years ago now, I think, takes the idea of those three different types of systems, ordered, complex, and chaotic, and splits the ordered into clear and complicated, as this was developed as a decision-making framework for organizations, for management. And in the ordered environment, there are some organizations, structures that are very clear, and some which are more complicated, yet they remain in the ordered domain. So in a clear environment, things are very logical. You just need to sense what environment you're in, see what category it responds to, and respond. There's best practices to follow. Things are very easy to know. It's like in Britain, for example, we drive on the left. In North America, we drive on the right. If I get the plane to the UK, I get a car, I just like, okay, what environment am I in? Driving on the left, so left driving environment, I respond accordingly, best practice, easy. Any reasonable person can do that. You don't need experts to come in to help you. Complicated, you still have all the tightly constrained, tightly coupled constraints, but they can be difficult to untangle. Now, this is the domain of experts. These are like very complicated machines, these modern airplanes, these things that have a huge level of complicated, detailed things that go on. That might not be single best practices, but they're generally good practices that can eventually be worked out. And a lot of academia, a lot of business operates in this area where we want experts to come in and understand what is happening and help us make decisions. As I said, if it was a chaotic environment, things are totally uncoupled, things happen all over the place, merge quite randomly. And the only way that we can deal with, if we do find ourselves in the chaotic environment, is to act and hope that something happens, sense what responds, and sense what happens when you act, and then you respond. This is the world that's adored by authoritarianism. I can't speak, but it means that dictators can sort of try to impose control. They take action, impose their sense of the world, and start creating a sense of order. However, in complex systems, there's patterns that are occurring. There are sort of trends that are moving, but they're non-linear. We can't predict exactly how they're going to occur. So we want to do probes in parallel, like multiple probes in parallel to see what occurs. We sense, the results, and then we respond by either reinforcing the good practices, the things that we like, or disrupting the ones that we don't. And it happens very naturally. We see that in Silicon Valley or other entrepreneurial environments where there are lots and lots and lots of parallel experiments going on. People are trying lots of different things, and although many fail, some succeed. And the ones that are successful get given extra energy and can be really transformative. So we do this very naturally all over the place. This is it has very important implications when we start looking at risk management and strategic planning for organizations, for societies, for governments, anything that is human organizations. The general view that generally when we try to do risk management, we assume a standard bell curve deviation, the Gaussian curve. And on the picture on the left there, you'll see in red half a bell curve, which is the normal assumed distribution of risk management. And the approach that's normally taken here is that we plan for all the things that are within that bell curve, and it drops off as it goes to the right to very low probability. Anything that falls outside of that bell curve is considered a black swan event, something that is low probability, high impact, but is unreasonable to plan for. So I could easily be planning for things, mitigation, disaster recovery, that my building is affected by fire or floods or whatever. But it would be unreasonable to start thinking about a meteorite hitting the city, as it's so unlikely to occur. The problem with this distribution is that in nature, we tend to find Pareto distributions. And on the right here, you have a Pareto graph of size of earthquakes and frequency of earthquakes. And so you have lots and lots and lots of small earthquakes and few big ones. And this holds true for pretty much everything in nature. You have lots and lots and lots of small villages, very few big cities, lots of mosquitoes, few elephants. When you have this distribution, so double log of frequency and size, you tend to have this Pareto curve, which is a different type of distribution. So if you sort of overlay this Pareto curve with your sort of risk management curve, what you end up having is called a fat tail. So this blue line on the left creates a fat tail, which means that occurrences, risks that were deemed to be low actually turned out to be medium risk. And this has huge implications because the number of plausible risks that could genuinely occur is absolutely massive, way, way bigger than we can reasonably manage for. To give an idea, if you just have 4 points in the system, you have up to 64 patterns that could emerge from 4 points. If you have 10 points, you're already in the trillions of patterns that could emerge. And human systems have many more than 10 points there. So it's many, many trillions of different patterns that could be emergent from the that are plausible things that could occur, which is way, way too many to reasonably be expected to manage for. So if you go through the 3 stages on the curve on the left, on the number 1 on the left there, you can use deductive logic. So deductive logic starts with a general rule that any rule that's below it must be true as long as your starting position is true. You know, if I say all birds lay eggs, chickens are birds, therefore chickens lay eggs, that's deductive logic. As long as your opening statement is true, everything below it is true. And we can plan for it using this deductive approach, which is the world that most of us would want to live in. It makes it very easy and clear to manage risks, to do strategy. Unfortunately, much of the context, the spaces that we are in, do not work that way. In the second part of this diagram, where our old sort of red curve with a sort of trail off to almost nothing, but we would have an approach where we would normally have modeling and we would use inductive logic. We'd be looking for patterns in large scales. Things like Delphi approaches, where we'd have a number of hypotheses gathered from a number of different experts. We would do likelihood analysis of them. We would run scenarios. This is the world that AI functions in. AI is inductive. Inductive finds patterns in existing data and draws general conclusions from them. So, you know, the AI, the modeling, all of this is very powerful in that section of the graph where we can then start identifying, you know, plausible patterns of things that we want to manage. Uh, it's, you know, scenario planning. You do force and factors analysis. You end up with a 2x2 matrix. It covers a range of possible outcomes. You produce scenarios that create a series of plans. But as we move to the right, we're dealing with a huge range of possible events, but there'll only be a very small number of actual ones. I heard it described once as it's looking for a needle in a stack of needles. They are all equally plausible, but we really don't know what will happen. And traditional methods increasingly fail as we move over there. And one of the problems is that we seem to be having more and more of these events that we were expecting as black swan events occurring in nature. I think this is a clear indication that actually our distribution ideas of what these black swan events look like needs to be reviewed. In the traditional method, we can't possibly use hypotheses. We need to have nil hypotheses. This is because of the inattention blindness. If we have a preset hypothesis of what we are looking for, we will miss early signals, weak signals of threats and opportunities that arise. And it is vital that we start moving from a world of robustness, where we're trying to plan to not fail, to a world of resilience, where we want early detection and quick recovery. The, uh, 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 the speed of recovery is vital, and it also means that there's a option for early exploitation, which is very interesting for strategic planning. Go on, Alejandro. You have
Just a question about the nil hypothesis that you mentioned. So how can we do that in a planning process? Do we start thinking in terms of alternative scenarios, alternative situations, or how do you implement this kind of idea of nil
exactly.
hypothesis?
No, thank you. So yeah, so no, so it's in the second section that we have different scenarios, different things that we're actually looking for, and that is where the Delphi method and things
Okay,
occur, where we have. In the third section, this is where we need to start relying on humans. So humans have evolved very much to be good at abductive logic. So we've already talked about the uh, deductive logic, top down, inductive, which is what AI and all these things do of bottom up. So an example of inductive logic would be I go to the same cafe every day for a month, same person at 11 o'clock every day walks in and orders a cappuccino. I can induce that this person orders a cappuccino at that cafe every day at 11 o'clock. I don't know that to be true. It might be they're only there for that period of time. It might, there's a million different things, but we're looking for patterns. As we move over to the right, abductive logic, which has also been called the logic of hunches, uh, is what humans have basically evolved to do. That we
okay,
are very, very good at finding possible connections where there isn't enough data to actually do it in a traditional analysis sense.
okay,
So what we would like to do uh, is yeah, so abductive, we it connects unexpected observations and forms insights. So if we want to be able to pick up early detection of threats and opportunities, we need to start listening to what people are sensing, especially when it starts off in the abstract environment.
okay,
Before we manage to clearly define something, to clearly articulate it, it often starts off as a sensation of feeling. Something feels off, feels weird. I think one of the big dangers we've had in some of the ideas in business and things, and I've heard this said in business, is like, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. I think that is a terrible advice, because by the time it is that clearly understood and defined, you have you have missed the weak signals. This is very late on in the development of things. So how do we actually tap in to the ability of humans to sense that something is up, where we're able to actually pick up on hunches and inferences of the most likely areas to pay attention to.
okay.
Uh,
Thank you.
and so the trouble is, for this to really work, humans sort of need to be activated to a heightened state of awareness. So in a heightened state of awareness, we see things we would not otherwise have expected. That this is where you know, people notice the gorilla, notice things that are weird. There's a classic example of the discovery of penicillin, where someone didn't wash the petri dish correctly, and an unusual mold grew. But like Fleming is in this heightened state of awareness because he's in it. That's he's thinking about it. He realizes of the significance of what occurred, and is a bit able to respond to it. Or the invention of the microwave. I can't remember the name of the scientist who was studying microwaves and noticed that the chocolate bar in his pocket had melted. But because he's paying attention and he's in this heightened state of awareness, he realizes the connection and infers the possibility and develops the microwave from it. So it's all about shifting from a world of prediction to a world of how do we trigger this anticipatory awareness and listen to people. And this is where technology is becoming a very useful tool to capture and sense patterns in huge volumes of data. So the science of human complexity really is about listening to what people are sensing at large scale. And we want to have this approach so we can have a rapid assessment of what people are feeling and saying and rapid response. Now, this happened probably quite easily when we were living in small communities, in villages where information would be shared closely. But in the systems that we have today, these large interconnected global systems, we need to find ways that we can re-empower people to be connected with themselves and share what they are feeling. And this is where the types of data comes in from. So there are three types of data. There's big data, which I assume most of us have heard about. So we have a huge amount of information, but it doesn't go into a lot of depth. There's information about behavior or what I click on or where I go shopping, but it doesn't say a lot about my worldviews, my emotional state, uh, how I was sensing about things on that day. You can also get a huge amount of insight from thick data, and traditionally this is very small samples. This is people going around doing ethnographic work, and it takes time. It's heavily dependent on the integrity of the ethnographer, the interpretation, and then the willingness of decision makers to accept what they say. There's a big problem in our modern communities that if people don't use the right language that we're used to in the environment, their views are neglected. There's lots of scientific knowledge in Aboriginal communities in Australia, for example, that has been historically ignored because they didn't communicate it in the scientific manner that academia is used to. And there's talk in Aboriginal cultures of the worry about the change of seasons because they can't smell the change of the season anymore. And scent is a very powerful tool in human beings. So scent plays a huge role in forming trust relationships, in understanding what's going on around us, and something that I think we lose when we're working remotely and these things. It's like all these things that are we're not necessarily aware of and conscious of that makes us actually share information and communicate in ways that are abstract and difficult to pinpoint, but are vital in actual managing of the systems. So when dealing with complexity of human systems, we need to stop treating humans as simply part of a machine that are there to play a role that's been predetermined and really lean into the values that they can bring. And that is, the intuition. And nothing we have developed so far can even get close to humans in that regard. The beauty of modern technology is that we can really start to leverage this and create what is known as rich data. It's sort of thick data at scale. And there are tools out there. There's one called SenseMaker. There are other tools out there which can gather a huge amount of data in close to real time, which has a deep understanding of what is behind it, asks people to self-identify the things that they think is important, and allows us to have early detection of the different risks and opportunities that we start to see emerging long before they are available by conventional sort of means of capturing them.
If you allow me to ask you something about this rich data,
Yes.
what kind of data points these systems collect? Because big data typically is transactional data or information that is available on the web, data points like that. in
Yes.
this rich data that these systems that you're mentioning, what kind of data points do they collect?
So what we're really looking for in the rich data is micro narratives. So this idea about it's about making sense of the environment that you're in. So when we talk about an organizational culture or any community culture, it isn't a static narrative that exists that covers it all. It's permanently emerging by lots of little micro narratives that we're sharing around the water coolers about the frustrations that come up when we interact with, you know, this or that person at work or wherever. And by capturing lots and lots of little micro narratives around the areas of interest, we can then start uh, identifying trends in them. And we ask people to self-identify these micro narratives as like, is this talking about something that's positive or negative? How do you feel about it? The way you word it is very important. You want to make it so that it's not gameable, that people don't know that what sort of answer you're looking for. Asking people to answer things on a scale of 1 to 10 is terrible because it ends up everyone knows, what sort of answer people are looking for, and you either give the answer that's desired or purposefully go against it. It's very difficult to get a genuine thing. So it is about the stories that communities and people are telling each other about the subject of interest. So this is where the mass civil participation becomes a genuine thing, and we want as much experiential and cognitive diversity in that because we want as many different points of view as possible. And I think this is important that it's like genuine experiential and cognitive diversity because a lot of the diversity training and things that we have, quotas tend to be proxies for this. People's sexual orientation or experiences growing up in different communities are proxies for having a different view of how the world is, which it becomes vital when we're trying to manage, very complicated worlds. Uh, I've spoken quite quickly, but I think we're getting close to the 40 minutes mark. So, as I said, this normally I try to cover, this in a lot more depth over like 3 days of the course. 40 minutes is very short. So, we do live in a world that's inherently uncertain. So everything is entangled with everything else. The only thing we know for sure is that whatever we'll do will have unintended consequences. The path to hell genuinely is paved in good intentions. I think one of the big dangers we have is to try to reinforce our model. We say, no, 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 like the model is right, like I'm going to stick with it, and we force people down that road, and it's too late before we realize what the mistake is we have. We have to accept that we need to be paying attention to these unintended consequences. Our job should be to manage the emergent unintended consequences. I don't think we should ever accept the argument that it wasn't planned for, it was emergent, there was no way to know. That is what humans should be managing. The speed of response to the emerging possibilities and threats is key. We need to really act very quickly. This is where we want to create sensor networks capable of real-time feedback. Within an organization, we can get everyone in the organization to be taking part of that. We should be able to do that for cities. There's big projects going on currently in Europe to get mass civil participation in these things using some of these techniques that are looking very interesting. Uh, Trying to think holistically, it provides a cognitive filter. Any model you have, and this is one of the issues, even with system dynamics, classical systems thinking, is that it comes from an engineering model where we still try to determine the outcome we want and then build a system to try to encourage it. And by thinking that we have an overview of the whole system, increases the cognitive filter of inattention blindness. We now look for things that fit into our model. We really want to try to move away from that and see what are happening locally. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have some sort of oversight and some sort of sense of direction. But to think that you can actually know holistically everything that happens is wrong thinking. There'll always be some context that's missed out in the model. And we know from chaos theory that the slightest change in initial conditions can have huge effects in an unpredictable part of the system. So it will have an effect. But then if you want to actually change the way a system behaves, change what emerges from it, we start looking at changing the granularity and the interactions to see what happens. And then you reinforce the good and disrupt the bad. Generally, to change a system, changing the actors or the actants within it has less of an effect than changing the interactions. You can swap out who's prime minister, but as long as you have the same lobby groups and the same structure of the organization, similar patterns will emerge. If you want to change the behavior, those are the things we need to change. Then we'll not really gone into this, but you can't change everything. You need to understand what can and cannot be changed. Change the things that are in play. There's a very good book called Obliquity about how major problems are best dealt with indirectly. Change the landscape around it, do little changes around big problems, and you can hugely shift what emerges. And all that we're trying to do in nature is try to change the environment so that information exchange and energy is optimized. Nature seems to have very much favored energy efficiency, which is one of the reasons why I think, modern AI, apart from the fact that it doesn't really do abductive thinking, it does inductive thinking, it's also energy hungry. So it can't really be an example of how nature works, as nature wouldn't be that energy hungry. The book was Obliquity. I could share it in the chat afterwards. I just saw it jump up. So I spoke about 40 minutes there. I hope it was clear, and I'll open the floor to any questions.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions.
Yep.
One is, how do you practice being flexible in terms of your mental models, or how can you expand your mental models? What practical recommendations do you have?
So mental models is a very interesting subject in its own right. So I'll share my screen in a second. There is a growing movement into neuroscience that actually suggests that mental models don't actually exist. It is something that comes from the environment. I've got a slide that shows this a little bit. Mental models was something that was very useful to think of historically, and played an important role. I know Donella Meadows used it a lot in the 70s and 80s. They were an important part of the thinking, but currently we seem to be moving on from it. And if I go down to this slide here, you'll see on the three A's: affordance, agency, and assemblage. And there's like a circle around it that says not mental models. The behavior and the way that actors interact tends to be from those three A's. So the assemblage is actually a translation from the French term agencement. I don't like the English translation assemblage. It sounds too static. You say assemblage to me, I think of assembling IKEA furniture. It's very static. Agencement is just the way things are laid out currently, but it's sort of moving and fluid. It's like, what is the current layout of the system? What is the dispositional state of the system? Affordance comes from ecology science. It's like, what does the environment afford you? What shelter is there? What food is there? Like, what actions can you take? And agency is, what is your ability to act in it? Like, what can you do? And we tend to find that rather than trying to teach individuals how to think differently, if we create an environment that changes the assemblage, the affordance, and the agency, the behaviors change. And I think that is a very important point, is that we still often work on ideas of individualism and a sort of Renaissance view of science and causality, which puts the influence on individual people, whereas the behavior is emergent from the context. So if we want to change the way people see things, we need to change the environment.
Thank you. And there are a couple of questions in the chat. Can you read them, or do you want me to have?
They popped up, so if you have them at hand, I'd appreciate you just.
Yeah, there are a couple. The latest one, in the context of listening to micro-narratives and sensing people's feeling, a lot of our interactions are conducted online, and people can be extremely wild in what they comment or what they say online. How can they distinguish if this is a real feeling or an actual threat or just a distraction?
That's very interesting point. Yes, I think one of the big issues with the internet is that it's been built on this individual libertarian view of the world, thinking that if everyone had agency and could choose the actions for themselves, the world would just magically be a better place. But there's no constraints at all. We emerge from an environment, from a context. And I think that it's important to realize that actually our sense of identity and our sense of obligations comes from community, and creating an environment on the internet that was totally unbound, there were no constraints at all, have created narrative tropes which act as attractors, strange attractors. Now, in fractal theory, fractal maths, they're called strange attractors, and they sort of suck people in. So we end up having created these sort of like hate cycles which people can't escape from, where people have fallen into. I think it's very dangerous to just go around gathering information from the internet. It is much better to actually have it in a structured way, which is where the tools and the techniques as to how we engage people, you want to set the context right. The context is very important. Don't just go grabbing information that's out there, as how you see the world emerges in context. Knowledge emerges in context. If you ask somebody to sit down and write down everything they know, they'll probably, only get a few pages out before they draw a blank. But, in context, people will know things and understand things and make sense of things. So it's all about context.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. Connected to these tools, or with the tools that you can have available to understand complex systems, what kind of models, processes, or mathematics would you recommend knowing to understand complex systems?
So complexity science is a relatively new science. Probably the Santa Fe Institute was set up in the 1980s, I think. Alejandro, can you?
I don't remember the exact
But
date, but yeah, it's a good reference.
yeah. So I mean, Santa Fe Institute was probably the first school that was really dedicated to complexity science. It had grown out of chaos theory. It is one of the three pillars of modern science that explains the world today. You have general relativity, you have quantum mechanics, and you have complexity science. Those are the three sort of fundamental pillars. So I would recommend go look at complexity science and the body of work that goes along with that. Let's see if I can show a picture maybe of the way that we would use some of the information.
While you search for that, I can mention a few techniques that we cover as part of the certificate in data analysis for complex systems. We cover, for example,
I've got
system
the expert right
dynamics,
here.
network science. We cover different kinds of mathematical optimizations. And as part of that umbrella, we also cover, as part of our grad certificates, different techniques from artificial intelligence. But yeah, I would say the Santa Fe Institute of Complex Systems that Mark mentioned is a good reference. And if you want to know more, you can also contact me. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and I can tell you what kind of techniques we cover as part of the grad certificates we have related to these topics.
Thank you, Alejandro. I should have thought to just send it back to you.
No, it's okay. It's okay. No, it's always good to have your perspective. And if you have a slide that explains, definitely it's a multidisciplinary approach if you want to tackle a complex system.
It absolutely is, and here we're talking about like shifting behavior in human systems, and so if we want to change how things are, we have to stop talking about how we would want things to be in an ideal future state. It's like this future is non-predictable. We have to live in the here and now and move from where we are. And on the map at the bottom, we have clusters of different narratives that were picked up from, one of the sense maker study groups. I saw a great one, which was for a health service in Britain, where it had on one side, one axis was how much do you help patients, and on the other axis was like how much do you follow procedures. And there were two clear narratives that you were either following procedures or helping patients. And just by creating that visual representation of what is happening in an environment is hugely powerful. And it's something that I've done with organizations. It's asking the staff about sharing narratives, and just seeing it laid out is very powerful. But now, if you look at the four circles down there, you've got alpha, beta, gamma, and omega. A mistake we often do is try to move everyone to where we want them to be directly. So say we want to be at the omega on the top right, because we all know that in any business graph, we want to be at the top right. The alpha, it's too big a gap for them to jump straight from where they are to the omega. What we're looking for are stepping stones. This is what's called the lignes de fuite, lines of flight in assemblage theory. So what are the narratives and the groups that we currently have, and what are the adjacent narratives and things that are close enough that we can start moving with them? Uh, and if you want to study how to do that well, honestly, the populist movements that are around do it incredibly well. If you look at the Republicans and the way that they talk about things, they have a main narrative, and they throw out a whole bunch of stories and things that are sort of adjacent around them, see which ones stick, and reinforce the ones that gain traction. And you just move from narrative to narrative to narrative, and you can create bigger and bigger tractor wells by doing that. It's a masterclass in how you should approach these things. And the danger that we have is if we are moving from somewhere that is too far away and we are trying to like bridge that gap, it's too big a gap. People are not willing to move to that gap. We need to find the natural flows of where we can move people in the landscape that exists.
Thank you, Mark. And regarding the US election, I was thinking that today's presentation was perfect for that kind of complex scenario.
Yes, indeed. I think how human systems manage is, and one of the things that we hear a lot is this desire to impose order. One of the things I didn't mention when I was showing the Canevin slide earlier, I'll just go back to it very quickly, so I think it's an important point, is if you see on the bottom between the clear and the chaotic, there's this sort of little fold drawn in. This is to represent the idea of a cliff. One of the great dangers is if you manage a complex environment as if it is ordered and you try to impose order on it, you risk catastrophic failure. And you fall off from an ordered environment into total chaos. And this is a world where suddenly dictators thrive because you need somebody that acts decisively. Doesn't really matter what the action is, any action will do when you're in chaos. And unfortunately, if we've created environments assuming that social systems, education systems, health systems, all these things should be ordered and clear, we risk pushing ourselves into this sort of environment.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see if we can answer two more questions. What would you say that would you say that one of the current challenges to bring about this change will be the passive assumption that ordered thinking is the de facto standard?
Absolutely. I think that we still live with this Renaissance view of the Newtonian mechanical universe, if we only knew everything. The other danger is that we have this idea that we can plan and manage systems centrally. We can have like a health system that is perfectly imagined centrally, predetermine the behavior of everyone across it, and roll it out. And unfortunately, if you want it to run smoothly, you actually need to allow for some inefficiencies. There is a trade-off at some stage where resilience and efficiency don't match up. If you push robust performance too far, you end up reducing how robust you are in an environment. To allow things to actually really work, you have to allow some level of inefficiency, and that actually produces much better results. You know, it might seem counterintuitive, but that seems to be the way nature functions.
Thank you. And if we have time, Mark, I'm gonna try to put it in the chat, this last one, because it's a little bit long. Let me send it to you directly.
Okay. I don't think I could see the whole thing, but it was about how do we manage to get people to be in a heightened state of awareness?
Yes.
Yes. So there's a very good paper that covers this. It was the European Union that published it. It's the EU Field Guide to Managing Complexity and Chaos in Times of Crisis. It is about asking large numbers of people in context to pay attention to specific things. In an organization, in a moment of crisis, in a project or anything else, you can have like these regular project meetings and you're asking people to pay attention to it. You can't run at that high level all the time. You need some downtime. In nature, you see that performance robustness graph means that we don't tend to run at optimal performance. The human cells tend to operate better at around 40 degrees Celsius, but the human body temperature is lower than that because we're in a fevered state. We're ill when we're running at peak efficiency. It's one of the reasons the body heats up when you're ill. It's to actually increase the efficiency of the cells. We can recreate that artificially by having a sauna or other things. It can be very good for the health, but you can't function like that all the time. So we do need to create environments that promote the different types of behaviors that we want. And again, it's all about creating the right spaces. We want spaces where people can be activated and paying attention, but we want the spaces where people can be calm and have downtime as well for a system to work correctly. But the EU Field Guide, I strongly recommend, European Union Field Guide to Managing Complexity and Chaos in Times of Crisis. Not the shortest name, but you should find it.
It sounds very interesting. Yeah, the one connection that I would make, but more from the productivity point of view, is a book from Cal Newport called Slow Productivity, more about sometimes how by taking things more slow, you are actually can be more productive and can start to detect these weak connections or weak patterns that might not be evident if you are in a high state of alert all the time.
Absolutely. And this touches to the obliquity question as to the way you deal with big problems indirectly. Because actually, you find if you put people together that have a shared problem, but get them to work on a different task, not looking at the problem directly, they will sort of accidentally start finding solutions for the problem just by interacting. You need to create a space where you allow for this emergence to occur. And I think the book Obliquity covers that very well. I think NASA just recently wrote a paper on the importance of obliquity that they just published that is very good as well.
Excellent. And Nabil just put, Nabil Metanjani, who is a colleague of mine, and the link or a mention to the publication you referred to. Well, and we are about above the hour, so I'm gonna have to thank Marc for the interesting presentation. We could continue talking about this topic for hours, but we have to put a limit, unfortunately. But if you are interested in learning more about these topics, complex systems, systems thinking, artificial intelligence, we have programs related to these interesting subjects as part of the School of Continuing Studies. I put my email in the chat. You can also search for me, and it has been a pleasure to have Marc present today. And it has been, thank you so much for attending this presentation. Thanks, Marc.
Thank you very much.